on certain plays and whatever. And I generally do tend to connect with players who do that a little bit more. And I know that he does have the brain to play Hearthstone at a high level, that he does think about things at a very high level. It's just sometimes he doesn't execute on that.
Right.
But it's been a roller coaster, right? Because not only do we had a series last week where he played some incredible Hearthstone, but also some kind of weak Hearthstone within the same series. But then do you also remember that series that he had, was it last season against Boston, which I think was one of the worst series we've had overall in Hearthstone Grandmasters
the whole
ever?
Thing.
It was just an abject disaster from both sides the entire time. But he's also had some really, really inspired moments of play. And then you even have to go back even before that and think about why he is a Grandmaster, which in no uncertain terms is because he drew Luna's Pocket Galaxy a bunch in a specialist tournament, right? Like, that's just kind of the reality of what happened. So I think, Felkeine maybe gets a little bit of unfair criticism humped on him because of, where he came from and in some of the moments where maybe his brain does switch off. But in terms of talent and peak level of play, I think Felkeine is a very, very good player. And I hope that we see more of that coming out as time goes on.
Well, let's just dive into game number 1 then. On the top, Jarla is going to be on the Just Brute Demon Hunter, and Felkeine is going to be on that hybrid with not only Brutes available, but also the Il'gynoth combos for some level of OTK as well. So, have you got any big thoughts about this matchup in general, Sottle? Do you think the more consistent earlier Brutes can overwhelm Felkeine, or do you think just the new hybrid really is also the new Brute Demon Hunter and that's it?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because in this matchup, when it was just Brutes versus Brutes, it was first Brute board was super dominant most of the time, right? Like the actual OTK part with the Lion's Frenzy, the actual quest part, just didn't really come into play that often. It was land a couple of Brutes early, and then that usually won you the game. However, in this position, Felkeine has a little bit of an angle to be able to deal with that board if it comes down, because he not only has a bit of removal, but he also has some healing and rebound potential. So I don't think that dynamic is as linear as it was, but I do still think it is the dominant strategy, and I do still think pure Brutes do it maybe 0.5 turns quicker on average if you really break down the deck list, but it's hard to say. So maybe small edge going over to pure Brute. But interested, certainly have not seen the matchup play out a lot of times, because as we mentioned earlier, almost to a person, the GMs have switched from Brutes to Hybrid overnight, right? Like, whatever Demon Hunter you were playing.
As well.
Yeah. I mean, some people were playing Fel, some people were playing straight up OTK, some people were playing Brute, and all of them just switched to the Hybrid OTK version overnight. It was a very bizarre 24 hours to watch that all happen.
So far, both players do have the weapon equipped, which means they can access that additional draw as and when they desire here. But Felkeine might have to just start with trading away this guild trader. Maybe start cycling a little bit more before he commits to swinging the weapon, because that weapon card draw is almost always going to be there, right?
Yes, indeed.
Pleasure doing business.
Interesting. So quest completion goes off now. Brute will be discounted to 2, which means a 0 mana Illidari Studies into Spectral Sight does allow Brute this turn, but he does not hit it.
And definitely understandable going for this for Felkeine, but the problem with these specific options is they all kind of just whiff next turn, right? The Skull's a little bit far away from the game plan here. Glide won't be at least active for your opponent, but I guess in this matchup that could well just be a decent thing. It looks like Felkeine just going to take the overall better card for his game plan.
Yeah, agreed.
It's not a bad one off the top, is it?
No, it's a pretty good order to draw those cards in. If you were going to draw a Lion's Frenzy, this was the right way around to do it. That one, not so. Never mind. I misspoke.
Hang on, there's still game. There's still game.
So this is very interesting, right? Depending on how he wants to do this, because he could just take the guaranteed draw. He could take a draw for 0 mana with the weapon, obviously, and then play a 1 mana Brute. There's no way to re-outcast the Spectral Sight, because even if he were to swing with the weapon, he puts the tradable on the right-hand side of his hand, which he'd have to spend 1 mana to get rid of. So yeah, I think the Spectral Sight is going to be stuck mid-hand no matter what, because the only way it's getting to the left is playing the card Glide, and obviously that doesn't work out either.
I like the coin sigil here, though. Do you think he should commit to the Brute if he doesn't draw a Philosophy?
I think so. Yeah, I think we'll see it come down as long as once it gets to 0, regardless of what happens here. Oh, 1 mana off. Yeah. Unlucky.
Tough. Still, though, he is on board first, and that 6/7 isn't exactly easy to deal with here either.
Yeah.
Even from Felkaine's hybrid, it doesn't really deal high single target damage unless you discover a Chaos Leech.
Yes. Yeah, but I think the big difference, and I was alluding to this a little bit earlier as well, is that the damage isn't as permanent against Felkaine's deck either, right? Because they can just have that quick rebound with the Moog and the Fellscreen Blast.
True.
The damage isn't necessarily permanent on Jarla's side either, but it kind of trickles through with Soul Fragments instead. Whereas if Felkeine ever feels under threat of lethal, he has that ability to just immediately rebound with the big burst heals if need be.
Of course, Felkeine does have his own Brute in hand. He has no Philosophy, but Studies could easily get him some additional card draw here. I think with the 3 mana available, could have gone for it, but decided to just drop a Brute for 3 and at least just challenge this.
Yeah, so it's the similar situation to what he had last turn, right? Where he would need the Illidari Studies to hit card draw, right? Yeah. Because he needs, essentially you need to draw 1 card per mana to make playing one brute worth it. So if he plays Illidari there and either hits card draw that's too expensive, in Skull, card draw that disrupts himself with Glide, for example, he would need to hit exactly Sigil Runner or Spectral Sight, which is slightly better odds than he had last turn. But on the previous turn, it was a simple matter of having to go for it to hit the Brute. Here, he could play the Brute anyway, but if he missed, he would not then be able to play the Brute because he spends 1 mana on the Studies. So in the end, just chose to go with the safe line.
Jarla going to reroll both players' hand with this Outcast Glide here. Oh, gets a second Brute for himself. And now with a reduced Acrobatics next turn, and a Weapon Swing, and the Sigil.
A Brute's coming down right now, right?
He's going to just play it now. Oh, okay, I didn't know whether with the Acrobatics he wanted to be a little bit greedier.
Look for Philosophy before he played it.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Because outside Alliance Frenzy now, that's just him done, right?
That's him done, yeah. But now, like, it's not like the Philosophies are bricks at this point, because you can still use them to duplicate your Spirit Jailers, so you get more cards in your deck with Soul Fragments, especially when you have the Lion's Frenzy already stacked up, ready to go. So, but I think, again, as I mentioned right at the start, first Brutes just tend to have a huge advantage in this matchup, or at least they did when it was straight up Brute versus Brute. So even though we haven't seen the huge Brute pop-off turns from either player, we've seen, I think, a real eagerness just to get Boulder Fist Ogres in play, essentially, right?
Yeah, and that's the issue, right? Like, suddenly, yes, this hybrid from Felkeine does run Immolation Aura, but you've got to do a lot of Immolation Auras to get these bad boys down at the 7 health, even without that buff from a potential Philosophy.
Felkeine needed... Yeah, he needed an additional discounted card draw. So he got the Acrobatics. He got nice Acrobatics to be able to dupe it up. Was the Philosophy in there as well. But he needed, off the Acrobatics aura, he needed to draw another card draw effect that he would then discount to be able to play it out and get the Brutes down. But in the end, just didn't quite get there.
Felkaine's still okay for now, and he will have the knowledge that the main fear really... Well, the 2 fears are just this 1 Brute and the Lion's Frenzy, right? That's pretty much the major issues he has to deal with. He does already have 2 Brutes in hand, so if he can either go for Glide next turn or just pull off a big draw in some other way, and he can land 2 Brutes, that does put up a bit of a wall against Jarla, even through a
Yeah, and again, I don't have a huge amount of experience in this exact matchup because it is so new and one deck kind of disappeared as the other one appeared, but you can relate it a little bit to either the straight-up OTK Demon Hunter matchup or the Fel Demon Hunter matchup, where I've had a lot of success in those matchups fatiguing Brute Demon Hunter, as weird as that sounds, because if you're playing a deck with a good amount of removal and a good amount of healing, you just kill the Brute boards, and then you stay at 30. And they don't 30 you with the Lion's Frenzy. They just don't. It doesn't happen. You don't get hit but for 30 in 1 turn. So most of the time, as long as you can do that, they just kind of run out of threats in their deck. And the last thing you have to worry about is like that last ragtag board of just every tradable minion in the deck that comes down at the end after they've run out of all the stuff to do. I don't know if that's something that's as possible to do with the hybrid deck, because obviously it doesn't play as much removal and healing as either of the older Demon Hunter decks do, but certainly something that Felkeine might need to keep an eye on here.
Yeah, in the end game, that combination of tradable minions definitely just forms the Suicide Squad of this game right now, doesn't it? You just well, these are all the rubbish. Let's just throw them out there and see what happens. See if they can get the job done.
Demons.
In double jump, 2-man acrobatics, these brutes are going to get cheap pretty quick here for Felkeine.
True.
Oh, there's an additional philosophy as well, which honestly I just didn't really catch until now.
Wow, starts off with ripping the glide here, though. Not get anything back, and that's not a discount turn either, which means he's going to have to pay full cost for that Spectral Sight. And will find himself in a spot of bother here. He is at 14, facing down 9 minimum on this turn.
Do you think that was a little bit too greedy for Felkeine, considering what his hand was made up from?
To use the glide, you mean?
Yeah, to not just go acro and get some level of brute defense down, because he could even philosophy and not play a third brute and just hold the other one if he doesn't have the mana for it.
Well, so I think initial motivation for Felkeine that turn was denying the quest reward from Jarla, right? That's what the glide was about. He felt like he was just losing the rates always if he allowed Kurtros to come down, so he just wanted to glide it away straight back into the deck. So I don't know if greedy's the right word for it. Like, I think ambitious, yes, but he needed to be ambitious, right? Like, he was in such a bad position there that what he needed to do was glide away the quest reward and get brutes back on the same turn. That was probably the required minimum for being in a good spot.
Quick, the quest reward's back. Glide again.
Glide it again, yeah.
Put it back. I mean, his hand's not great otherwise. He can pick Spectral, which is probably just the go-to, right? 1 mana draw 2 seems very strong, but... Oh! Double Fell Scream.
Not it, is it? It's just not getting there. Out of card draw. He needs to Fell Scream to even be able to swing and draw the tradable minion here to get enough health back. Could be the play. I mean, annoyingly, if you go Moog Fell Scream, you can't then spend the 1 mana on cycling the tradable minion either. That's just going to be lethal with Librarian.
Yep. The old Librarian silence. If there's one brute, you know you're good. Who needs Kane, right, Sal? Who needs Kane?
Who needs Kane? As long as there's exactly one taunt on the other side of the board,
perfect.
You're chilling. Yep.
And Jarla gonna take a victory here with this just pure brute Demon Hunter. And if you just check the score out, of course, he's already been 2-0 this week. He won through his group. He's now took a win again with this Demon Hunter. So even though we talked about leading into this match that feels like a bit of an old list now as the time's moved on, yet again, the same problem we have with Jarla is that's true, but he wins. So it's tough again to just really criticize, as he did just get the job done. And Felkeine couldn't quite piece anything together, right? Nothing quite fully came together for him during that game.
Yeah, he was just always a turn behind, right? His brutes came a turn later, so it was a reactive brute, which Jarla then had control over the plays on. His quest finished a turn slower, so he was kind of gliding away the quest reward on the other side while completing his quest, but he wasn't answering the board state. Just everything that he did just felt that one little turn slower. And we did talk about that dynamic, I suppose, in the beginning, where, you know, just the makeup of the deck. Again, I'm kind of sketchy to say this because I haven't actually broken down 30 cards to 30 cards about which deck actually has more interference with card draw, because there's a lot of cards in Brute Demon Hunter that do interrupt cycle, right? With the the Spirit Jailers, the Lion's Frenzy, and so on. Since Kayn got replaced with Royal Librarian, obviously that's another whiff that's gone away. But I think also the factor that, like, Spirit Jailers, for example, put Soul Fragments in the deck, which then really help the brute game plan overall, does make a big difference. We did talk about that dynamic, how it could be a little bit faster for the pure brute Demon Hunter, and it did seem to pan out that way. But we're now going to move on to Shadow Priest for Jarla. Interestingly, the deck that Jarla is banning in so far all 3 of his series, and that's why perhaps, you know, moving on or continuing the thread of what we're talking about, maybe this isn't just a, well, I'm playing Brute Demon Hunter because it's what I'm comfortable with. Maybe this is a deliberate thing to not have to follow the same ban strategy we're seeing from other people about banning the Demon Hunter, right? Maybe by building his lineup in this particular way, he's getting himself a different ban out of the equation, banning out Priest, now 3rd time in a row in this tournament that he has banned the Priest. And we've seen some of the disgusting things that Shadow Priest can do to a lot of the decks in this metagame right now.
Yeah, this might be a bit of a tough one, though, because Felkeine is not playing the Handlock. He is playing the Fatigue version. And although you might think, well, you know, how does he win, blah, 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 without the threats? But against Priest, you just really need to delete their board once, maybe twice, or 1.5 times, I guess. And Felkeine in this list, I'll just rattle off some cards. You can see the Moarg Artificer there, which of course helps a lot with potential removal, and just being a competitive minion on board in this matchup. But also, double Armor Vendor, he's running double Touch, double Drained Soul, 1 Unstable Shadow Blast, and then also a Hysteria and the 2 Soul Rends. So I think when you piece all that together, I think Jarla's going to have to go extremely quick here to be able to grab a win, because it feels like this deck from Felkeine has a little bit more game than, say, having a giant or a null stuck in your hand.
Did you see Luna's draw last night with Shadow Priest in this matchup? Well, very close to this matchup, I suppose, in Americas. I mean, that's the kind of draw that you're going to need to get started against this, to be perfectly honest, because you are right. There's a ton of removal in here. There are a few cards as well that, you know, are a little bit clunky. The Moarg is fine, I suppose, as a minion, but not particularly effective if it doesn't get paired with a Mortal Coil or a Touch or whatever else. Mana Feeder Panthara can be a little bit slow in terms of reacting to the board. Double Hand of Gul'dan as well is a card that could just punish Felkeine a little bit. It's a tiny bit greedy because there's no matrons to discard them. They're literally just in the deck to be played for 6 or 5 or 4 if they get discounted by Rod. So there's a few clunky cards that can stodge up the hand a bit here for Felkeine, but I think in general he should be able to do enough to pick apart these board states. And I do love this opening play from him as well, just using this Moarg Artificer to win board aggressively in the early game.
Yeah, because Quest just doesn't matter right now for Felkeine in any real way. He just needs to, like I said, the main goal is, I think you want to delete the Priest board like 1.5 times on average, gets the job done, depending on what the hand looks like. And you see Jarla having to respect this, and now he just has Coil. He can Quest now if he wants, not really feeling too punished for it. Has Backfire, Drain Soul, another Coil, a lot of removal, and Jarla's currently got a very, very slow hand with 2 Homunculus.
Yep.
Is it Homunculi?
I believe it is Homunculi, yes.
Okay.
But I'm very unsure because of Danny Dyer's chocolate-flavoured homunculus, which I'm pretty sure was supposed to be a plural. There are multiple of them in the band, formerly known as Man Feelings. I know you don't understand this reference, but
no. I was just thinking I need to rewatch Full Metal Alchemist to get the answer to the question instead.
See, yeah, sure.
It must say plural for homunculus at some point.
Right, but I'm pretty sure it is homunculi, yeah.
General theory here from Jarla is that there's a low reason to not hero power because he's expecting to have 2 mana free next turn when you're just playing 1 card off the top. He's going to hold on to it though. Why do you think that is?
I mean, top deck, like drawing Twilight Deceptor maybe, and your board's getting cleared up this turn, like 3 mana, Drain Soul Touch or Drain Soul Coil. You don't have a source of damage on the next turn, maybe, but even then, Twilight Deceptor off the top would cost 2, right? So you could just throw the hero power in there if you really want.
Twilight Deceptor, and you can like raise dead and play something else, right? Which is, I don't know. Void Touchdown, so the pressure is on Currently no Soul Rend for next turn for Felkeine, which is probably when he'll be looking for it to deal with the homunculi. But look at everything else he can do. Oh, Armor Vendor as well.
It's into the curve perfectly. Still no Soul Rend, but there is that Hysteria, which will do decent work on the board shaped as it is at the moment, but not perfect. Oh, that's actually just made Jarla's board weaker to Hysteria, right? If that comes into play this
Yeah, that's kind of what you want to see.
Because that is now coming down as a 5-6, which just quick maths across the rest of the board on the other side.
Look at Felkaine's little face.
Yep.
He's having a good time.
There's no way this goes wrong, right? Because it doesn't even matter if the Armor Vendor gets attacked. It's still... It doesn't! It lives! It's the actual perfect outcome! So it doesn't actually matter, in inverted commas, because if at any point the Armor Vendor still got attacked, there would still be a 1 health buffer left on the remaining minion to clear up the rest of the board. That just means he has a 1-3 that gets to attack face and hang around and challenge the next minion. So it is, of course, the best outcome for Felkeine, but I don't think it was a real deal breaker whether the Armor Vendor got attacked there or not.
Yeah, and when you're against Priest and you're considering playing Ruined Mithril Rod at any point, you know you're probably having a good time, because I think Felkeine can squeeze it in next turn. He has other options as well, of course. He could just end up playing a Bristleback if he really feels like it. It's just a solid enough minion. He's still a few cards away from really having that active, so it could be worth more to just play it instead. We'll see what the draw is, but my main point, Jarla's really behind. Or rip it.
Just pay 6 for it.
Oh, yeah.
This seemed a little better.
Yep, he can bop it and then touch.
Here we are again.
Bop it.
Going for his toy contract. Needs to be big gas off the top, and that is not it for Jarla. Needed Raised Dead, Twilight Deceptor, Mindrender, Lucia, Gandling at least to have some semblance of a plan. Just hold on to it, trying to erase Dead the next turn, something like that. Get something going. True, yeah.
You could still hear a power and play, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no normal tap here. Go for the tour guide.
Yes, completing the rod with consecutive normal taps.
Armor! Armor! Lightly used armor! Here for the tour?
It does amuse me playing this deck, 'cause I have played Fatigue Warlock a good chunk on ladder, and there are a lot of matchups like this, where, particularly against Priest and Face Hunter, you just clear up early and then you win board, but it never feels like you're getting anywhere, because you just keep, like, Raised Deading Armor Vendor, and you're like, yes, I'm pushing 4 this turn! Oh, I killed my opponent for 4 again. It just happens over and over again. You just make no progress in terms of actually pushing damage on board. The Void Touch Attendant will certainly help in that regard, though.
Now I could play 2 more Armor Vendors. It's okay. And most importantly here, Felkaine's 1 draw away from just having the other cards active. Let's just see what... I've actually got the wrong deck list open here. Let's just see exactly what Felkeine has in the bottom 11 of his deck. So still another Bristleback. Tamsin with some levels of removal with that Drained Soul and Unstable Shadow Blast. But I think most importantly here, just the 2 Raised Deads is still not used. It just means that he can just win on board in most circumstances.
Yeah, Felkeine, I'm kind of with you. I sleep. Jarla is doing Jarla things. He's trying to find his 0.001%, but that is a very real number right now, even if that does exist. I think that might even be ambitious to his chances of winning this game.
Yep, I think this being exactly Voracious Reader was the one thing that's keeping Jarla playing this game.
Yeah.
Which is fair.
Rips the hand, gets a double discount on Raised Deads, which was less than ideal, has to be said.
Can pretty aggressively push the quest now, though, right? Double Raised Dead, 0 mana tap, bolt. Blast, sorry.
True. Yeah, he could have actually chosen, if he wanted to abuse the Void Touched Attendant to get a whole bunch of extra power through from the quest, but chooses to clear it up straight away. Obviously, Moarg interaction with the touch. Talked about on APAC, right, that like Moarg doesn't really interact with touch, but in a way it does, right? It makes it easier to get the proc to go off because you have to kill a minion with the touch, even though it's not a lifesteal card, so the actual healing isn't doubled.
Okay, just going to continue to assert dominance here. Going to go that second raised dead just to see what's on offer. And like I said, even right now, he can just play Moargs, right? Like, and that's still just winning on board, regardless of their effect.
Best matchup in the game for Moarg Artificer, has got to be said. It's both as an excellent removal piece, but also as just a tool on board, because there is 0 gas in the opponent's deck to be able to deal with the Moarg Artificer. Felkeine's having one of those moments. There was a lot of ordering things going on that turn. I started off, talking about killing the Void Touched Attendant, which, yes, was a concern. Sometimes it doesn't really matter, because even if you take the extra damage to complete your quest, you then get 4 lifesteal back from the damage that you deal to your opponent anyway, so you start to make up some of that immediately in regards. So Felkeine just, having one of those frustrated moments with himself over something that happened that turn. I'm not entirely sure what exactly he caught, as I kind of glossed over the end of the turn, but just needs to stay focused, because the series has been going fine for him so far, I think. And I think if there is a danger for Felkeine, he gets lost in those moments, right? And then after one, a second one comes, because he's still too busy thinking about the first. So
even with this,
focus, play the game ahead of you. Game's won, just finish it off.
Yeah, even with this, the only thing he ever has to think about is when he's going to proc his quest. Because if he slips and potentially steps into like an Elucia into Tamsin from Jarla, then that's when things are going to get very funky.
Yeah, and that could have been one of the concerns on that turn as well, like whether he was supposed to use the raised Eds to fill up his hand for the potential Elucia on the other side, because then he's giving a bunch of tools over to the opponent, like, potentially Moarg Soul Rend given over to the opponent in certain situations, because you've raised dead and got yourself a Moarg in your hand, which the opponent can't do, but that's unlikely to be relevant. There's a lot of little micro things that could have potentially been optimized in that one, but as you mentioned, we were kind of checked out. I think both players were kind of checked out come around turn 6, turn 7 of that game, right? Because it was super over. The Voracious Reader from Jarla kept him interested for just a little bit longer. But yeah, I think from this moment on, the game was pretty much doomed.
Yeah, if the armor vendor lives, it's all over. But yeah, it was a good response there from Felkeine. I had a feeling the game was going to go this way, as I mentioned right at the beginning. I think in this specific matchup against this Warlock, you need to go absolute nuts from turn 1 as the priest and just go max damage, max aggro, and maybe you do have to just get Elucia right and just buy yourself that full free turn to have a good solid chance at winning. We are going to be moving on to a different matchup and a different Warlock, as Jarla is going to be on the more common handlock there, you can see, and it looks like he's going to be lining it up against Felkeine's Rogue as we go into game number 3.
Yeah, which is kind of a classic matchup at this point, about as classic a matchup as anything gets in this metagame, because it feels like as soon as anyone's really getting to grips with any individual matchup, it disappears and gets replaced by something else, as the never-ending revolving door, the carousel of decks that's coming out this expansion just continues to march on. But this is, again, a slightly old-fashioned version of handlock, by which I mean at least 4 days old for Jarla at this point in this metagame, because there's still a Tamsin in there, there's still Giants in there, but it is the Rod plus Panthara version that people switched over to after the most recent Flesh Giant nerf, taking out the Anetheron from the deck, going for a little bit heavier on card draw and discounts with the Runed Mithril Rod instead. Whereas the Grot Rogue coming out here from Felkeine, his build is fairly straightforward, double prep, which has become more or less universal. A couple of outliers still, but generally prep is the go-to build. One Penflinger tends to be the go-to as well. But it's 2 Wand Thief, 0 Foxy Fraud, which I think is the interesting talking point about Felkeine's build of the deck overall.
Yeah, it's one thing, like, I know the prep sort of dipped in and out and in and out, and there were people who were talking about, like, prep makes the deck easier but not better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think the more we see prep, over the course of, a couple of weeks now, we've been seeing this deck played a lot. I think the more you see it, I very often don't see prep achieve nothing significant, right? It really does just make some turns that much more powerful. So, although I'm not exactly a Garrote Rogue specialist, it's something I like playing with myself.
So when you say your version of Garrote Rogue, it sounds like you're Scooby-Doo scared of something? Garrote Rogue!
Maybe that was intentional, Sottle.
I don't think it was, but it was.
It wasn't, but maybe it was.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, I've never really subscribed to that theory that, the prep is training wheels or whatever it is that people have said, because there's certain things that prep just makes possible that aren't possible otherwise.
Yeah, and it just
right?
lines up well. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can argue that, still being able to prep a Garrote at the end to go for the lethal is something that you could just set up better for, and maybe that's what's meant by training wheels. But your opponent does get to play cards, and sometimes you're under so much pressure. Yeah, no, that's the thing. Sometimes you're under so much pressure that you have to do certain things. You can't just be so greedy with all of your resources that you can kill at the end without a prep in your deck. Not to mention, prep Shroud on turn 1, right? That's not making the deck easier. That's making the deck better. That's a thing that you're just not able to do otherwise. To, maximize the chances of hitting Octobot on 2 or an early enough field contact to start cycling, all of those kind of things. So overall, I'm a big fan of the prep in the deck.
And as we move on to turns 3 and 4 here, Felkeine has pieced together a very good opening. Octo has double field contact already, so doesn't have to worry about going fishing for that. A secret passage to basically just play a different turn at any given point. The Swindle to keep the card draw cooking. It's all lined up very well, and although Jarla's opening hand is decent, he's really just a backfire away from being able to keep up with this.
Raven, I don't know why my brain has just pieced this together now, but I've just realised the stupid thing that Felkeine was annoyed at himself about in the previous game. So he started the turn off by killing the Void Touched Attendant, and then ended the turn by attacking with all his minions.
Right. Yep.
I was trying to think of so many things that were so much more complex than that. I've just figured it out.
It's when a Hearthstone autopilot brain kicks in, it's like,
exactly.
Do the minion trades, go face. That's just an order I think most people do.
Yeah. But it's because he was primarily concerned about how much damage he was doing to himself with raised deads and things, right? So he just did all of that stuff first and then attacked with his minions at the end of the turn, which is obviously wrong. Yep.
Still, though, his hand is looking great. He's got options as well next turn, right? He could go for one of those, the first field contact style turn, or he could just go for secret passage and then play a different hand for a turn to buy himself basically more time to get more mana. Jarla, on the other hand, though, this is the problem in this matchup when your opponent is doing things nice and early, is everything you do feels way slower.
Yeah, even when what you're doing is objectively pretty fast, right?
Yeah, it still feels too slow, because you're like, am I dead next turn?
The Lorinda dynamic, as I like to call it. Ever since that day when he was insisting that Spellmage killed you on turn 5. So no one else heard it. This is in a private call and a practice session. It wasn't on broadcast or anything, but it will go down in infamy as one of the funniest things
I like it even more, though,
ever said.
Because we've all been there, right? Where we just get latched onto something and we'll not hear anything else.
Yeah.
Right? Looks like Felkeine is going to favour that field contact turn to start digging through the deck. Let's have a decent one for it. I think the Prize Plunderer just helps out a little bit more as well with that. Ooh. Shenanigans.
Shenanigans indeed. Probably going to end this turn off with the Neophyte and then call it a day. But yeah, interesting decision, because that's now one spell damage used and now step back into the hand, so the spell damage isn't on board anymore. One Shadow Step used. So this field contact in hand is going to have to get a lot of work done, because suddenly if you're cutting into the second Shadow Step as well, to like Shadow Step a Field Contact, for example, to be able to dig really deep through your deck, you're in a scary territory with the total amount of damage that you have left in your deck at that point when you chose to Shadow Step an Octobot in particular. So very trusting, I think, Felkeine here that he has sufficient card draw left remaining to be able to dig through the rest of this deck very quickly. And I think that's a reasonable assessment of the situation with, like I said, that second Field Contact already in hand, about to get discounted for a second time at some point this game. Secret Passage and a couple of One Thieves that quite often pick up card draw as well. I think he'll be in a reasonable spot.
Yeah, and it's not like he's just thrown away the ability to deal 30 in a turn, right? He still has that available to him. Warlock, especially this one, does not go beyond 30, so as long as Felkeine can just get away with the next couple of turns, all right, he'll be fine.
Yeah, that's what I mean about this Field Contact having to get a lot of work done, though, right? Because as soon as you play this Field Contact with the intention of Shadow Stepping that's then 1 spell damage, 2 Shadow Steps gone from your deck, right? And then actually life becomes a little bit more difficult.
You're looking at a potential Secret Passage here, just to try and sort of draw cards that way, if that makes sense, right? He gets to just play the cards out with the new 4, and he's got plenty of mana to do so. Oh no. It's like Jarla played a Lucia. Just a free turn. And, okay, I'm going to ask silly questions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever play, like, 3 of these cards? Like Plunderer, Prep, Brain Freeze, just to delete 3 cards? It sounds very silly, and I'm aware it is, Sol, but I'm asking it.
I mean, honestly, it's why I was silent for large portions of this, because I don't honestly know what you're supposed to do with this hand, because obviously the intention of the Secret Passage was to draw cards, which, you know, deleting cards from the Secret Passage essentially does. But if he was able to legitimately draw cards, obviously that's much, much better for him. But things like Prep, depending on how much mana he thinks he needs, are important. We talked about it at the start, right? About how important prepping a Garrote can be in those lethal pushes towards the end. So now Felkeine's having to calculate exactly how much he needs, because he Shadow Stepped Octobot. In terms of his consideration tree of things that are important to kill his opponent, total mana is quite low because he has a Shadow Stepped Octobot in his hand. So I think that's one of the reasons why he did choose to throw away the prep, compounded by the fact that he actually has both Garrotes in hand already, so he knows he'll hit them with any discounts he plays this game, whether it's this Octobot or the other remaining Octobot. The Garrotes are going to get fully discounted the whole time.
And this is the turn from Jarla. He actually gets to play, right? This is what generally this deck builds up to, is the big pop-off turn where you fill the board with a lot of threatening minions. He can more or less do so, right? That Giant at 2 can be reduced very easily. He has the Bristleback that I believe is at 1 on the far left there, just to kill off this Plunderer and heal. It's all adding up pretty nicely here for Jarla, and Felkeine has to make the choice next turn whether he goes for some kind of lethal or if he can stall on this one. He did not play the Brain Freeze, so he has that in the deck somewhere. He does have 2 1-makers, so it's possible to stall, but the decision, I think, will have to be made before he even starts. Oh, second Scavenger, but he's going to go for Neophyte.
Yeah, shake of the head. The expression from Felkeine tells you everything you need to know. He is in real trouble this turn now.
You just go, right? I think you just go and hope for the best.
Through a Neophyte?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's so ugly. Okay, okay.
Too quiet.
He has a ton of card draw just through these minions he has alone.
Garbage, but those cards were never really going to be relevant anyway because of the Cult Neophyte, just slamming through them as quickly as he possibly can.
Ace has to kill the 2-1. The Guardian Orc Merchant, I suppose, Gordon.
I mean, the problem is there's still an Octobot remaining, right? So ideally he wants another prop for that. Prep does technically save mana in this position.
Was he locking it in?
Looks like it, yeah.
Okay. We go second Garrote.
I give up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just going to bail on that one, and that one turn was all Jarla needed, and that's the general game plan. I think as we've seen Handlock evolve in a lot of matchups, it really is less, especially with the giant nerfs, of course, about getting like an early giant down, and much more about drawing through the deck fast, getting the reductions, getting that mana cost low, and then having one almost unbeatable board, right, is the general game plan, and we saw that from Jarla on this turn.
Yes, yeah, we did. And certainly Felkeine felt hard done by with his secret passage, not really hitting anything at that point.
Right.
No second shroud, for example, no swindle, which I believe was left. Even a Kazakus there, right? Like, he could have potentially played Kazakus, picked up 1 mana golem with like shoot poison or something that might have given him some kind of plan for the following turn. It just was a very, very poor secret passage overall. But again, the Shadow Step Octobot plan instead of the Shadow Step Field Contact plan is something that you have to look at a little bit as well, because it did make that last field contact mandatory to win the game, as I was talking about, which meant as soon as he was forced to go in that turn with the field contact, as soon as he could see it wasn't working out, which it was never going to through a Cold Neophyte, that's why you see the concede come down, right? Because he knows the game's over at that point.
One thing I do love about when we get a deck like this Garrote Rogue in the meta is the absolute flurry of tweets I'm going to see in approximately half an hour discussing every turn of that potential game from the Rogue side.
For sure.
And I'm not even joking, I seriously love it because so many different approaches, like it's our job to talk about turn by turn, you know, Latin approaches from players, but when all the top pro players dive into that conversation as well, it's one, I can learn a lot, and two, just interesting to see what people think, because it's not often that even at that level, players just agree, unless it's a very obvious mistake or a very obvious play, right? So something this deck's kind of created at the moment, and I'm loving every minute of it, Sol.
Yeah, I always have talked about that. I've talked about it a lot less since we've moved away from live events because of, you know, the current global situation. But one of the real moments that hammered home to me how hard Hearthstone is the first time I was in like a big open tournament and sitting in the viewing room that most tournaments will set up. Like a DreamHack, they have kind of a little cinema room where you can sit down and watch the games that are being streamed. If you do that with 6, 7, 8 other top players around you, you will soon find out that everyone disagrees about every single play that happens in a game of Hearthstone. And these aren't bad players disagreeing with good players and being wrong. These are good players disagreeing with other good players, because that's how difficult Hearthstone is. And generally, you'll get into a position where you'll default to someone because of just consensus that they're the best in this situation, right? Like, it's a Garrote Rogue play, so default to what Orange is saying about it, right? Like that kind of thing. Yeah. But no one can actually prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that their line, that their play is the best in most situations. And I think that's one of the dynamics that is super interesting about Hearthstone at a top level.
Yeah, I'll always remember the Grand Finals 2017 World Championships between Frozen and Tom. Everyone crowded around that monitor backstage, all the players. It was great.
Well, no, but at that point, every single person agreed that keep was wrong. That's a bad
I'm on about I'm on about throughout the game. Just everyone stood around watching in general. But yes, let's get into this game before we sit and just reminisce for a few hours, which we could quite easily do. It's going to be the matchup of the weekend. It's going to be Rogue versus Priest. Already Jarla a few turns in. Heading to turn 2, double homunculi open. I'm just going to keep saying homunculi now, whether it's right or wrong.
That's not even the correct application of a
I know, because I said double.
Because you would just say double homunculus. It would be 2 homunculi.
That's what I mean by I'm going to say it whether it's right or wrong.
I see. Okay, right, fair enough.
Bit of an awkward follow-up, though. Just going to choose to hero power away this Aug Merchant and just help retain that tempo he will eventually receive from the homuncules. Felkeine already praying. Of course he did. Win last week, gain a lot of points, but that doesn't mean he can sit back. He's in no position to feel comfortable yet. Imagine this is going to be the Merchant, right? Jarla just go as big on board as possible this turn.
I think so, yeah.
Just rely on the fact that the homunculus just makes good trades.
been a while. I feel like we've had a week off from this, Raven.
Yeah, it's weird.
Where Jarla, for the first time ever, did not make it to broadcast. But the considered style that Jarla has made famous in European Grandmasters. There's only one play this turn, surely, and it's this, but he will do it on the rope.
Yeah, I mean, it's even half interesting to look at the potential of Void Touch Hero Power away the Neophyte and defend the health on the Homunculus.
Yeah.
I do think just plopping a 5/6 on board is just way, way stronger.
Yes. Counter argument, 5/6.
5/6, yeah.
Yeah. I'm
I'm
also so enamored with this Homunculus thing because, like, Homunculus is so funny because it looks like Phil.
Who's Phil?
Phil from Hercules.
Oh, right. Okay, that is good.
You with me? You following me?
When our powers combine, so it's just fantastic.
Philoctetes, whatever his full name
Yeah.
is. They just call him Phil in the film, right?
Isn't it Danny?
So it's a homunculus that looks like Phil. It's just amused me. It's distracted me entirely from this actual game of Hearthstone.
I'm doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
Jarla has a really good draw off the top, honestly. Wriggling Horror into Hero Power. Like 3 6s are pretty tough to kill here for Rogue. He does have to be a little bit afraid of what happens with this contact next turn because it is stealth. There's not much Jarla can do about it. But again, I refer back to the previous turn where it's just like, that's just a lot of stats.
It is, but at the same time, you kind of worry that any amount of stats could get deleted by the stealth field contact that you can't deal with, right? If Prize Plunderer Shadow Step starts to come down on the other side, maybe you're just a little bit scared. So priority number 1 for me is Void Touch Attendant hitting the board, maximum damage being pushed, right? Because then even if you do lose board, you actually have somewhat of a win condition on the other side. Jarla is actually choosing to trade down as aggressively as he can, miss out on a ton of potential damage here, which to my mind does open a little bit of a window here for Felkeine. It would be a disgusting turn, don't get me wrong, if this board was able to be removed. But we've seen people, and we've seen Felkeine in particular, have some incredibly disgusting turns in this exact situation.
Yep, cue the music, someone. Here we go. But I agree. I think I liked killing the Neophyte in some way. I also quite like the high health on the Homunculus, so yeah, this was just a tricky turn from Jarla, honestly, and we'll see if it pays off as Felkeine is going to be drawing a ton of cards, gets to flurry. I imagine we're going to see this Penflinger and a Shadow Step on the Prize Plunderer to kill off the Merchant, especially with those freezes.
And this is what I mean, like, yes, what Jarla did raised the requirements for what Felkeine needed to make this turn happen. But still, if you want to look at it in a binary sense, of the turn either happens or it doesn't, Jarla's play missed like 10 damage, right, in reality. So I'm kind of a little bit sketched out. You see the fist bump from Felkeine. That's what we want to see. We want to see less of that shaking head of the, you know, slapping himself in the face stuff that we've seen from Felkeine as he gets distracted and gets upset about his plays. More about the fist bumps as he executes perfectly, because that is now a dominant position that he finds himself in this matchup.
And this is such an awkward hand from Jarla. To an extent, the Raised Dead and the Voracious Reader are actually terrible as a combination of cards.
Yeah.
If that was just any other minion and he can just play Voracious Hero Power this turn, draw a card and move on, fine. But with the Raised Dead, he probably wants to see if he can get some use out of that right now, especially with the Homunculus in the pool.
It's not it, though, is it? Feels pretty miserable to be playing any of this into this board state.
I mean, simply put, he has to Hero Power the field contact, right? That just has to happen every single time.
Yeah.
More like a wisp than a warden.
Is anyone else lost?
Guardian Og Merchant would have been a really good pickup from that trade, honestly, so we can snipe an additional minion or just not have to Hero Power instead. And get hold of it, though.
Alright, so is this a play all your stuff apart from the Octobot kind of turn, or can he get enough of it out of his hand to not have to worry about Mindrender or Lucia? I think the latter is probably true, right? You can just replace all of these discounted cards with expensive cards using the field contact? Yeah, I think this is fine.
Even gets a nice brain freeze there.
Mm-hmm.
Jarla's going to have to pull something out the bag. He doesn't have a way to even kill this field contact at this moment. Double Voracious Reader.
Have to eat this one.
At least I've got a lot of health.
It is finished.
Something.
3. Such a massive amount of health in this particular matchup. You are right. And chalk went up for Team Raven, I guess, as the win rate trends a little bit back towards the 50-50 we were promised. I believe in APAC it was putting some work in as well, that side of the matchup. But still a very, very interesting one, and one that we've seen Felkeine victorious in a couple of occasions. And I do think that is a particular interaction to look out for. It's Shroud of Concealment into field contact, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because stealth field contact is just the goods in this matchup. It's safe. It lives. You have just invested into that field contact, and you get a full turn of it the next turn. But this was the really interesting one as to whether Jarla was supposed to make favorable trades on his terms to protect the board as best he can, or just say, it doesn't really matter what I do, I'm going to lose the board to this field contact here anyway, let's just push the damage. I think that was probably the biggest talking point in terms of the play from Jarla's side, whereas from Felkeine's side, I think it was a very, very well executed game of Rogue yet again.
Yeah, I think I'm actually with Jarla in general on the approach, because he knows he's going to be in trouble with the field contact. That's a fact. But there are varying levels of trouble he can be in after that turn. And the problem is, if he pushed all face and the turn he doesn't want to happen happens, then does he ever make up the rest of the damage? I don't think he does in a realistic way if he's expecting the field contact, obviously, to get work done. So if he trades, it at least opens up to, if the field contact is just average or medium, it would have to still be good to kill that board. Then if it's just an average field contact, he can still stay competitive on board and keep pushing damage over multiple turns. So I think the overall game plan there was fine for Jarla, but he just faced down a pretty incredible turn from Felkeine, clearing up the board pretty much completely and taking control, and one card off the top at a time often doesn't answer that outside of what exactly Alusha, exactly maybe Ganling into a 1-drop as well to just have a 3-6 and a 4-4 on board. But outside of that, it's going to be difficult from that point. But as you said, the stealth there field contact is pretty much what you want in that scenario.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of hands that win. One is early Octobot into just a ton of tempo, right? With just vomiting out a hand nice and early. Octobot discount, and then just play like Neophyte or Guardian Orc Merchant, Prize Plunderer or something, right? And that's the rest of your hand. You just win board from that point and tempo out. And the other hand is that big field contact hand. And getting it stealthed off Shroud of Concealment is one of the absolute best ways to do that against Priest, because you can invest a little bit of health into just saying, okay, prep Shroud of Concealment, great, I hit field contact, that's my whole turn. Sure, hit me for 8 or whatever this turn, it's fine. You're allowed to do that. I'll clean it up next turn with all of this mana that I have available. So I think very nicely navigated from Felkeine. I think your argument for Jarla's way of playing there is a good one. As I said at the time, if you just look at it as binary, either the turn happens or it doesn't, then Jarla is missing damage. But the reality is that it isn't, right? Because
exactly.
Every trade that you make increases the amount of cards, the amount of outs that Felkeine needs to hit to make that turn happen. Like, bare minimum, there had to be a Prize Plunderer in the top half of the deck. And then on top of that, Felkeine also hit 2 Shadow Steps and a Brain Freeze and everything else that came out that turn, right? So it was a very, very low percentage or high percentage draw from Felkeine's perspective that made that turn as powerful as it was.
It was also even bigger than just the 1-point loss that Jarla took there, because now he has to play Shadow Priest versus Hybrid Demon Hunter, and I think Derek was talking about this morning on APAC, or maybe it was yesterday. They all start to roll into one.
It was this morning.
When we were testing this, I very quickly found this is an unfun matchup as the Priest. Like, you just lose. I think you have to have again, as we keep saying with Priest, it's one of the matchups where I feel you do have to have the absolute rapid opening, because even just a single Brute coming down early, it puts a lot of delay on your game plan. I will say this opening looks pretty good from Jarla, and having Mind Render is a huge help as well. But those Brutes, if they get down on, let's just say even if one Brute comes down on turn 3, it puts a massive delay on the game plan for the Priest.
We go over live to footage or audio from within Jarla's brain. Finally, I've played 3 games with this stupid deck, and I've finally drawn the one hand that wins. Took long enough. Yeah, here we are.
Is it gonna win?
Said it was the one hand that does win, not that it's going to win this game. Very important distinction. But yes, being facetious, of course, but it's just to follow up your point, is that there are matchups where you do just kind of think, okay, I need the broken hand, right? Yeah. The Void Touched Attendant into Elucia, and the Exodia, as it was being called last night, with Luna's particular draw.
Even the Desk Imp in situations like this helps, right? Of course, we're staring at an Immolation or a Felscreen Blast, but still, if you have the Void Touch, then an extra minion for 0 you can just throw out starts to stack up damage very quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting on the dynamic of whether this Desk Imp is better in play or not, right? Because obviously it can just get killed at any point by the hero power, but will push 2 damage while doing that. But you can also choose to just time it on the turn you play the Mind Render, right? So you know you get to double dip that damage at the very least. Like you play the Desk Imp, you play the Elucia, you know it's then there on the potential next turn. But even then, the Demon Hunter has the ability to hero power it. So I'm slightly questioning why, with double Raise Dead in hand, this Desk Imp isn't just in play pushing damage, you know?
Well, yeah, I'm with you, because I think the Raise Dead, if anything, even helps that, because they spend the mana to hero power it. And then it's in the pool, so you can just throw out probably 2 Desk Imps at any given point, if you want to double Raise Dead, of course. So, like, this just looked like it could have been on board last turn, and if Felkeine's spending 1 whole mana to kill a 1/1, when you have this board already, I think that's just a win.
Of course, you also get endlessly duplicating Desk Imps, right? Like if you were to put down a Desk Imp and then go face, and then it gets hero powered, you Raise Dead it, you then have 2, and you get 2 from the next Raise Dead. But Jarla has clearly counted that this is time. I will trust him. It looks decent with this board left to go. He will be pushing what? 3, 4, 6, 7 plus 5, 12... 14, 15 with the hero power on the following turn. It's a lot of damage.
It's one of the few moments where Voracious Reed is actually fine to play, right?
Just as a 1/3 that draws no cards for the opponent? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and then if it lives, of course, it's potentially drawing cards for him, although he will be drawing a lot as a general game plan. But with that Wriggling Horror, he knows that's just a ton of extra damage if he doesn't play it this turn.
You've always got to think about as well, the Raise Dead pool just doesn't really exist for Jarla right now. So if you play anything, Jarla can trade the Elucia into it, hero power his own Elucia. He doesn't then have mana to Raise Dead it and replay it in the same turn, but he will have a guaranteed second Elucia at that point, which is scary.
I grow impatient.
So you can't play or do anything, or you will lose.
Well, welcome to playing against Shadow Priest. Yes.
Job done.
Felkeine decided the wriggling was too much of a threat. He would rather his opponent have a guaranteed 1/3 that doesn't do much instead. I can see it. Oh, wait. Oh, he can't. Never mind. It's actually pretty clutch that the Og Merchant can't die as well as the Elucia trading, right? But it's important, of course, that Felkeine didn't kill the Og Merchant, because then he could have Raised Dead, traded the Elucia, the Elucia, then Raised Dead and do it that way, right?
That's very cute, yeah. Not possible, but very cute. I like it. Yeah, Tour Guide was probably the draw, right? Just to be able to cheat that mana from the hero power, to be able to manipulate the Raised Dead into Elucia again.
Felkeine's just like, please. I think he was thinking about the Tour Guide.
Is that what you're scared of, the Tour Guide on the other side?
Yeah,
I would imagine so, right? And you just trade this, right? Like, you want the ability for this to be dead.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
Now Felkeine needs, Immolation Aura, just to put as much stuff in the pool as possible and be like, don't you dare.
That's not it. That's not it either.
Could glide the Raised Deads away.
This...
It might be slightly dead on board, but...
continues to not be it. One more Spectral for Felscreen Blast, which clears up very little, but it's the best case scenario now. And yet again, continuing not to be it. Actually, those still could have been Immo, right? Because of the discount going off from the quest completion.
So these I-Beam. Does Moag I-Beam ever do enough?
I mean, maybe if he still had one more mana to play with, he could have gone Moag. While playing a Philosophy for 0 to maintain a Moag in hand, but I think he's just too deep down the tunnel now. Not enough mana left to play with to really do anything particularly effective here.
Pleasure doing business.
Oh, brutal. Absolutely brutal. The first card where it just outright wasn't playable, the Immolation Aura comes off the top.
Wow, and that's going to be it there. That looks like enough damage to me, Sottle. Jarla's going to take the victory. Super close series, and it just wasn't enough. And when I was talking about it's a tough matchup for the Priest, no matchup is tough if you have that opening. Jarla put him under so much pressure and managed to get that Elucia out. And also just limited the options because Felkeine was aware of the raised deads, right? And the pool was so small, he knew a lot of things could cause issues, even for that double Elucia play. It was just a well-played game there from Jarla, of course helped by the hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I 100% agree with the way it was played out. Obviously, we were talking about the desk dynamic in the beginning, and then when the Elucia came down was, arguably a little bit early as well. I think, as you're correctly pointing out, it's backed up by those raised deads, right? That's why generally when you see an Elucia come down this early that doesn't just straight up end the game, it is because it's backed up by those raised deads. And that he was willing to give the hand over while the raised deads were just unplayable for the opponent on the other side so that he could abuse them. But there were some outs from Felkeine, right? It was very clear what the out was. Felkeine spent an entire turn looking for it and wasn't able to hit it in the end. It would have been very interesting because suddenly if Moag Immo came down or Spell Damage Fellscream came down, the raised dead pool would have been immediately quite diverse, right? Because of so many minions dying. So you couldn't really have guaranteed anything super impactful coming back from Jarla on the other side. But anyway, Felkeine going through the ringer as he always does with emotions on camera and even various body positions that he twisted himself into during that series. In the end, all to no avail because Jarla took a week off last week. For the first time, we didn't have him on broadcast in European Grandmasters, but he has regained his spot now in the semi-finals. We will now be seeing Jarla once again on Sunday.
Yeah, and even so, even though Felkeine took a loss there, and obviously he would have really liked to help gain some points for the win, he did make it to top 8